The station Varel 9 floated in orbit above the gas giant Thelan like a crown no planet had asked to wear. 47 levels of polished alloy, diplomatic chambers, translation arrays, and the quiet grinding anxiety of 47 species who had been doing this for exactly 400 years. The Galactic Concord was not a government, it was an agreement, the kind that only survives because everyone at the table is equally afraid of what the universe looks like without it. 400 years of careful words and careful seating and careful, deliberate silence about the things that kept every species in that building awake at the edges of their various nights. And then there was humanity. Princess Mara Voss arrived at Varel 9 with 3 things: a translation earpiece, a hard-sided case of diplomatic materials, and a thermos of black coffee she had already refilled twice before the first session even began. She was not a princess by blood. The title was a translation convenience, something the human political structure adopted because Deputy Governor-elect of the Earth Concord sector converted badly into 11 alien languages and princess landed clean and carried the right weight. She was 29 years old, which, in the span of the Concord's history, made her not just young but cosmically young, the political equivalent of a child who wandered into a room full of exhausted adults and pulled up a chair without asking. The other delegations noticed her the way you notice a loose thread on an otherwise perfect coat, not with malice exactly, but with a nagging awareness that something was slightly off about the picture. The Savannian elder who coordinated seating had placed the human delegation near the east-facing door, not the main entrance, not the center of the long table where the older species sat with the comfortable authority of things that have been important for a very long time, near the door that opened onto a secondary corridor nobody used. It was where they always put the humans. Mara sat down, uncapped her thermos, and did not seem to notice. The summit's first 2 sessions ran the way Concord summits always ran, careful and slow, built for longevity rather than efficiency, trade corridor agreements in the Pellet system, resource-sharing protocols along the Ninth Belt, a minor territorial dispute between the Varati and the Hessen that had been tabled 17 consecutive times and would almost certainly be tabled again before anyone in the room grew tired of tabling it. Mara listened, took notes, asked 2 questions that were precise enough to make the Savannian coordinator look at her for slightly longer than was polite, and drank her coffee. She had the kind of stillness that read, to alien observers, as someone not quite tracking the conversation, but was in fact the stillness of someone tracking everything at once and deciding carefully which parts to respond to out loud. The Varati ambassador, a 7-foot arrangement of iridescent carapace and impeccable credentials named Thano SS, had been watching her since she arrived, not with hostility, more with the puzzled attention one gives to an animal behaving outside its expected range, the way a naturalist pauses when a creature does something the field guide said it. The 3rd session never officially began. The station's outer sensor arrays activated. The sound they made was a low harmonic that traveled through the floor and into the feet of every delegate in the chamber, and then the screens at the front of the room lit up with readings that made the Savannian coordinator go very, very still. 2 delegates stood immediately upon seeing the numbers. 6 more stood when they saw those 2 stand. Thanosis read the numbers once, read them again, and then said one word in his native tongue that the translation array could not render directly, but it picked up the emotional content and delivered it into every earpiece in the room as something that landed, in each listener's mind, like the word asterisk ending asterisk. On the screens, a sensor ghost at the outer edge of the Varati sector. Then 2 ghost readings. Then something that was no longer a ghost. The Concord's eldest historian, a Savannian named Orithfel, old enough to have personally archived the records of 37 planetary evacuations, stood at the front of the chamber and delivered the briefing in the measured tone of someone who has practiced staying calm about things no one should be calm about. He called it Carathal. The dust that eats, that was the old Varati religious name. The silence at the end of maps, that was from the Hessen navigational records. It had collected names across 9,000 years the way catastrophes collect names, each one left behind by a civilization that had just enough time to describe it before the running began. 9,000 years in the historical record, 11 star systems rendered empty, not destroyed, not burned, asterisk entered asterisk, scoured clean the way a bowl is clean after something very hungry is finished with it. No weapon had touched it, energy-based, mass-based, exotic particle cascades, all of it either absorbed or simply irrelevant. The tracking systems that followed those weapons stopped returning data at a certain proximity, the way a conversation stops when someone finally says the thing that ends it. 41 civilizations had developed formal evacuation protocols specifically for Carathal. Orithfel listed them by species name, 41 different peoples, across 9,000 years, who had each sat down and carefully, rationally, correctly decided that the best possible response was maximum distance at maximum speed. Every single protocol shared one instruction across all 41 versions. Run. The chamber was already moving before Orithel finished his last sentence. The particular practiced efficiency of species who have been afraid for a very long time and know exactly what fear looks like in action. Security details forming around delegation leaders, docking authorizations being filed on handheld arrays. The Variety Ambassador's personal guard assembling a formation around him that Mara recognized from the briefing materials as their highest alert protective posture. It was almost impressive, the smoothness of it, the way 9,000 years of collective terror had been refined into something that moved like choreography. She watched it from her seat near the east door. Then she raised her hand. Orithel looked at her, genuinely startled. In 47 sessions of emergency protocol, he had never once seen a delegate raise a hand. How close, Mara said. Has anyone actually gotten to it? The room did not go quiet. It was already quieter than a room with 47 panic species in it had any right to be, but something shifted in the texture of the noise. Orithel opened his mouth. Closed it. His 17 words for fear were suddenly insufficient for what he was experiencing, which was the specific disorientation of hearing a question that should not exist being asked by someone who appeared to be genuinely curious rather than suicidal. He did not answer. No one answered. The evacuation call went station-wide 30 seconds later. The lighting shifted to deep amber, which meant non-optional departure. Every corridor filled with organized urgency, species executing plans they had rehearsed without ever openly admitting they were rehearsing them. Mara picked up her thermos. She walked, not toward the docking bay, toward the forward observation corridor, which faced the exact direction the sensor readings were coming from. Behind her, the chamber emptied in under 2 minutes. Ahead of her, the forward observation window was already showing a change in the stars, a region where the light was doing something that light does not do, quiet and total and without drama, the way the most serious things always arrive. She kept walking. Her hands were steady. She was breathing the way a species breathes when it has decided something it cannot decide. Short, controlled, deliberate, the breathing of something that evolved on a planet that was trying to kill it from 17 directions at once and learned, deep in the bone, that breathing right is the first thing and the last thing and the only thing that is always yours to control. She kept walking. The docking bay on level 31 was full of the sound of departure. Ships detaching from their berths made a particular sound, a low, clean separation, like a word being taken back, and that sound had been going off in steady intervals for the past 8 minutes as delegation after delegation cleared the station and pointed themselves away from the direction the sensors were tracking. Thanos stood at the entrance to his own docking bay and did not board his ship. He was not sure why. He told himself he was performing a final security sweep. It was a reasonable thing for a Variety Marshal to do. It was the kind of reason that holds up under examination, but the truth, which he was not quite ready to say out loud even to himself, was that he was watching the corridor feed on his personal screen. Specifically, he was watching the feed from the forward observation corridor. Specifically, he was watching Mara Voss walk toward the wrong end of the station as if she had somewhere to be there. The Variety were not a fearful species by nature. That was a common misconception that Thanos had corrected in diplomatic briefings more times than he could count. They were a careful species, which was different. They had survived on their homeworld by being excellent at calculating which things were worth engaging with and which things were not. Carathol was, by every calculation his species had ever run, firmly in the second category. The math was not complicated. 9,000 years of data, 11 empty star systems, 0 successful countermeasures. Any intelligence model built on those inputs produced the same output every time. Leave asterisk. And the Variety were very good at building intelligence models. But Thanos had been watching the human delegation for 2 days, and he was beginning to think that humans might not run their inputs through the same models. Or they ran them through the same models and then did whatever they wanted anyway. He was not sure which interpretation was more alarming. He found her in the secondary observation junction on level 12, not even the main observation deck, a narrower corridor with a single reinforced window that faced the outer quadrant, used mostly by maintenance staff to check hull integrity. She was standing at the window with her thermos in her left hand and her right hand flat against the glass, not in a dramatic way, just resting there, the way you rest a hand on a wall to feel if it is cold. Outside the window, in the direction the sensors had been screaming about for the past 20 minutes, the stars were wrong. Not dark, not absent, wrong. The light coming from that region of space was arriving at angles that did not correspond to the sources it should have come from, bending in small ways that light only bends when something is telling it to. Thanos had read about this in the historical records, the visual distortion that preceded Carathuel's full presence in a sector. He had read about it in the same detached archival way one reads about things that happen to other species in other centuries. Seeing it in person was a different category of experience. "You should not be here," he said. Mara did not turn around. "I know. The evacuation order applies to all personnel and delegations." "I know. Carathuel is entering sensor range. The outer hull sections on this side of the station are already reading structural irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" He paused. It was not the response he had prepared for. The alloy composition of the hull panels is returning inconsistent density readings, as if the molecular structure is becoming uncertain of itself. Mara looked at the window for a moment. "That's a strange way to describe metal. It is a strange thing that is happening to the metal." She finally turned around then, and Thanos had the specific discomfort of being looked at by someone who was clearly not panicking in a situation that should produce panic. It registered in his threat assessment instincts as deeply abnormal, like encountering a prey animal that had not run when the predator appeared and was now just watching with mild interest. "Marshall," she said, "in 9,000 years, in all the historical records you have on Carathuel, has any species ever tried to not run?" The question sat between them like something dropped from a height. Thanos opened his mouth, closed it, ran through his considerable knowledge of the Concord's historical archives, the 41 evacuation protocols, the 11 empty systems, the Savannian records of the first contact event in the 3rd century of documentation. No species had ever tried to not run. The thought had presumably occurred to individuals over 9,000 years. It was the kind of thought that occurs, but somewhere between the thought and the action, the biological reality of being a living thing that does not want to stop being a living thing had intervened every single time. "No," he said. "Why not?" "Because running worked. It preserved the species. The ones that ran survived to record the event and build the protocols. The data is clear on the survival outcome of evacuation. But not on what happens if you don't. The inference from 11 empty star systems is an inference," she said, "not a data point." Thanos looked at her for a long moment. He had 17 words for fear in his native language, a reflection of how central the concept was to variety cognition. Fear was not a weakness in their culture, it was information, it was the nervous system of civilization. It told you what the universe was made of and how to move through it without being ended by it. He looked at Mara Voss, standing in a corridor on the wrong side of a station that was being approached by the most documented source of extinction in galactic history, holding a thermos, asking questions, not running, and he realized, with a slow and uncomfortable clarity, that he did not have a word for what she was doing. Not in his language. Not in any language the translation array could offer. "You are going to stay," he said. It was not a question. "Yes. And do what?" She looked back at the window, at the place where the stars were wrong. "I don't know yet. I'm going to see what happens when something doesn't run. What if what happens is that you stop existing?" She was quiet for a moment, long enough that he thought she was finally, sensibly, reconsidering. "Then we'll know that too," she said, "and the Concorde will have a real data point instead of an inference." It was the most Mara Voss sentence Thanos had ever heard, practical, slightly infuriating, and delivered with the calm of someone who had decided before they started talking. He should have left then. His ship was waiting, his security detail was waiting, 9,000 years of species-validated survival strategy was waiting, and he was a careful species, a data-driven species, a species that built its entire civilization on the principle that correct fear is the foundation of correct action. He stayed. He told himself it was a security decision, that a Concorde Marshal had a responsibility to maintain situational awareness even in a non-standard event, that he would document what happened and the data would be valuable. These were all reasonable framings. But the truth was simpler and harder to say. He had been in the Concorde for 30 years. He had sat across tables from 47 species. He had watched diplomacy and war and the slow, grinding machinery of civilizations trying to coexist in a universe that was not designed with that goal in mind. He had never seen anything like this. He pulled up the security feed on his personal screen, sat down on the corridor floor with his back against the wall, and watched Mara Voss watch the window. Outside, in the sector where the light was wrong, something was getting closer. It did not arrive the way destruction usually arrives. There was no sound, no pressure wave, No alarm that would have meant something recognizable was happening. The station's alert systems had gone to maximum 2 minutes ago and then gone quiet, not because the threat had passed, but because the systems had run out of categories for what they were measuring and defaulted to silence the way an overwhelmed mind defaults to blankness. What happened instead was a feeling. It started in the outer hull sections on the side of the station facing Carathal. Thano SS watched it on the sensor readout on his screen. The material integrity of the hull panels began returning numbers that should not be possible for alloys that had held structural form for 200 years. Not breaking, not melting. Asterisk forgetting asterisk. The molecular bonds reading is uncertain, as if the atoms themselves were no longer entirely sure they wanted to be in the arrangement they were in. Then it reached the interior sections. Then it reached the corridor. Thanos felt it as a heaviness in his chest that had nothing to do with his lungs, a kind of gravitational pull that was not physical, not directed at his body, but at the part of him that had opinions and plans and reasons for doing things, the part that had spent 30 years building a career and a reputation and a set of beliefs about how the universe worked. That part got very, very heavy. He had read the accounts, he had archived dozens of them. Survivors who had been in proximity to Carathal and made it out described the experience in remarkably similar terms across every species and every language, a dissolving of. Asterisk want asterisk. Not pain, not fear in the familiar way, just the slow, quiet removal of the sense that continuing was a thing worth doing. He gripped the screen in his hand tighter. He focused on the weight of it, the specific pressure of the edges against his palm, a physical thing, a real thing, a thing that was definitely there. It helped, slightly, the way pressing a bruise helps, which is to say it does not help much but it gives you something to push against. Mara was 20 meters ahead of him at the forward junction window. She had not moved. She was still standing with her hand on the glass, and from where Thanos was sitting she looked, in the amber emergency lighting, like someone who had been standing at a window for so long she had become part of the architecture. He watched her on the chance that she would turn and run, that the feeling would reach her and her body would make the decision her mind had decided against, that the 9,000-year survival record of asterisk run asterisk would assert itself through her nervous system even if her brain had voted differently. She did not run. Her shoulders dropped slightly. He saw that, a long exhale visible even from this distance, and then she straightened again, and her hand stayed on the glass. She felt it. That needed to be said clearly, not because it made what she was doing less difficult, but because it made it more honest. She felt the weight arrive in her chest with the familiarity of an old appointment, the specific heaviness of asterisk why bother asterisk, and she recognized it the way you recognize a street you grew up on even after years away from it. Because she had felt it before. Not from Carathal, from the ordinary disasters of being alive on a planet that had not been designed with human comfort as a priority, from the years when the resource conflicts had made 3 continents functionally uninhabitable, from the decade when the atmospheric correction programs had failed twice and then a third time, from the personal griefs she carried the way everyone carries them, worn into the muscle memory of daily life. The feeling was not new. What was new was the scale. It was the same weight but pressed by something with incomprehensibly larger hands, and for approximately 4 seconds she stood at the window and her body told her, very clearly and with what felt like genuine concern, that she should stop doing this and go somewhere else immediately. She breathed in, controlled, deliberate, the short focused breath of someone who has been training for something without knowing it was training. She breathed out. Her hand stayed on the glass. Outside the window, Carathal was close enough now that the distorted light she had been watching for 20 minutes had resolved into something she could almost describe. Almost. It was less a shape than a condition, a region of space that operated under slightly different rules than the space surrounding it. The stars on the far side of it were visible but arrived wrong, filtered through something that rearranged them in ways that were just barely perceptible, the way words look wrong after you have stared at them too long. Within that region there was asterisk structure asterisk, not a body, not a face, nothing that the human visual system had categories for, but organization, a pattern that had been sustained for 9,000 years and was very, very good at what it did, the pattern of a thing that had never encountered a reason to be otherwise. It was not looking at her. It did not have the architecture for looking, for the specific directed attention of an entity that notices an individual, but something in its movement, in the way the wrongness of the light around it was oriented, suggested that it had registered the station the way a current registers an obstacle, not with thought, not with intent, but with the adjustment of a system responding to new data. Then it stopped. Not slowed, stopped, in the way that only things with intention stop, and the wrongness of the light held position and did not advance and did not retreat. Thanos stared at his screen. He had never seen that in the historical record. No. One had. Mara pressed her hand flutter against the glass. It was a small gesture, purely physical, no dramatic weight behind it, the kind of thing you do when you are trying to feel the temperature of something through a barrier, and she was aware, even as she did it, that it was not a strategy, it was not based on a plan or a calculation, it was the thing her body chose to do in the absence of anything more sophisticated, which was to reach toward the thing she was looking at. This was very human. This was the thing that had gotten her species into trouble, and out of trouble, and into entirely new categories of trouble, across its entire history on a planet that should have killed it. Several times over by now, the reach, the hand going out before the brain had finished deciding whether reaching was wise. She was afraid. The weight in her chest was real, the shaking she had locked in her left hand by gripping the thermos was real, the part of her mind that was quietly and persistently suggesting that she was being genuinely foolish was real and probably correct. Her hand stayed on the glass. Outside, Carathol held its position. The two of them, the woman and the thing that had ended 11 civilizations, remained in that stillness for a long moment that neither of them was counting. On his screen, Thane OSS watched the sensor readings. The hull section integrity. Numbers had stopped dropping. They were not improving, but they had stopped dropping. The molecular uncertainty that had been spreading through the outer panels had paused at approximately the same moment Carathol had paused. He ran the comparison 3 times because the first 2 times he did not believe what he was seeing. Then he sat very still on the corridor floor with the screen in his lap and the specific, disorienting experience of watching data that contradicted 9,000 years of established understanding. Carathol did not stop. It had never stopped. And yet here were the numbers, clear, consistent, unambiguous, saying that it had. He looked up from the screen at Mara. Standing at the window, 20 meters away, one hand on the glass, holding a thermos, afraid in a way that was written plainly across her posture for anyone who knew how to read it. Afraid. And still there. His language had 17 words for fear, each one a precise instrument, each one carrying generations of meaning, and not one of them had a slot for this particular combination of afraid and anyway, frightened and present, terrified and asterisk reaching asterisk. He was a species that had defined survival as distance. He watched a human define it as contact. And somewhere in the gap between those two definitions, something 9,000 years old had stopped moving for the first time in recorded history. The glass stopped being a boundary in the way that matters. Not physically, it did not crack, did not dissolve, did not do any of the things hull materials do when they fail. It simply became, for a specific and unmeasurable length of time, beside the point, the way a door becomes beside the point when what you are dealing with does not use doors. Mara felt the change before her eyes could confirm it, a shift in pressure that was not air pressure, not temperature, not any of the things the human nervous system has dedicated instruments for measuring, something more like the pressure of being looked at, except by something that did not have eyes in any sense she had a word. 4. She did not step back. Her hand was already on the glass. She had put it there 10 minutes ago without a specific plan, and now, in the moment when a plan would have been genuinely useful, her body continued the gesture that it had already started, which was the only honest thing she could do. Her palm pressed forward. What she touched, or what touching became in the absence of a clear barrier, was not what she expected, which was nothing because she had not known what to expect. It was weight, enormous, old weight, the accumulated density of 9,000 years of a single experience repeated without variation, and that experience was asterisk being run from asterisk. She felt it the way you feel the history of a place when you walk into a room where something important happened long ago. Not knowledge, not information, but the shape that repeated events leave in the air of a space, and what Carathol had in its air, in its structure, in every pattern it had built across 90 centuries, was the shape of fear running away from it. That shape was its architecture. It had grown inside that shape, it had become the thing that shape required it to be, and the shape was so old and so consistent and so total that Carathol had no other version of itself. It was what it was because everything it had ever encountered had confirmed, by running, exactly what it should be. Mara felt all of this in the space of a breath. Then she did the thing that her species does when it does not know what else to do. She stayed. Not heroically. There was nothing clean or composed about it. Her left hand was gripping the thermos hard enough that her knuckles had gone pale. The shaking she had been managing had moved into her jaw, and there was a voice in the back of her mind that was being very reasonable and clear and specific about the fact that she should leave now. She stayed anyway. Because she was human, and this was the thing humans did, not fearlessness, not courage in the storybook sense where the fear goes away and the hero moves with clarity. The other thing, the messier thing, The thing that had no good name in most languages, including her own. The thing where the fear is entirely present and real and correct, and the body moves forward anyway because somewhere in the evolutionary history of a species that survived a very difficult planet, the decision got made that *forward* was the answer. And that decision got written into the bone so deep that 9,000 years of galactic wisdom was not enough to reach it. Carithuel's structure met the thing it did not have a process for. It had elaborate systems, 9,000 years of them, refined across 11 star systems, tuned to the specific input of civilizations in flight, the terror of organized minds. The psychic weight of species-level panic, the accumulated desperation of things that very much wanted to continue existing and were certain they would not. Those systems were precise instruments. They received her. They found fear. Yes, the fear was there, real and clear and present, but underneath the fear, or through it, or woven into it in a way the systems could not separate out, something else entirely, contact the specific quality of attention that moves toward rather than away, the thing that is the structural opposite of everything Carathol had ever been given. The systems tried to run their standard process. The standard process required something moving away from it too. Feed the motion, a current created by departure, by distance increasing, by the particular energy of civilizations deciding collectively that existence mattered more than confrontation. What they had instead was a human woman pressing her hand toward them. The process found no input it was built to use. It started at the edges. Not dramatically, Thanos watched it on his sensor screen with the expression of someone whose understanding of the universe is being revised faster than his mind can file the paperwork. The outer structure of Carithuel's field began returning inconsistent readings. Not the same inconsistency had been causing in the station's hull panels, the opposite, where it had been making solid things uncertain. Its own field was now becoming uncertain itself. The pattern that had held for 9,000 years was losing its reason to hold. A pattern built on the energy of running things does not know what to do with a thing that reaches. It began to come apart. Not with noise, not with the violence that the word destruction implies, quietly, the way a crowd disperses when the reason for gathering is gone, individual components of the field losing cohesion and drifting, not destroyed exactly, more like, released, freed from a shape they had been holding so long they had forgotten the shape was a choice. Mara felt it go. She did not feel triumph. She did not feel vindicated or heroic or any of the things that the story of this moment would later get assigned when other species told it. She felt the specific hollowness that comes after something very large stops happening, the way a room sounds different after a noise you had stopped noticing finally ends. The weight in her chest lifted. Not all at once, gradually, the way a very long-held breath releases, in stages, the body catching up to the fact that it is allowed to breathe normally now. She lowered her hand from the glass. Outside the window, where the stars had been wrong for 40 minutes, the light was returning to its correct angles, unhurried, ordinary, the stars back. In the positions her navigation instincts expected them to occupy. Where Carathol had been, there was space. Just space. Then, drifting, fine and dark and nearly invisible against the stars, dust, unremarkable particles that dispersed slowly into the sector, carried by the ordinary physics of a region of space that was now, again, operating under the ordinary rules. Mara looked at her hand, the one that had been on the glass. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at the dust drifting against the stars. She said. It was not the word that the Concord historians would have chosen for the moment. They would write about this for generations and use words like *pivotal*, and *transformative*, and *, the event that redefined the Concord's understanding of first contact dynamics *. But Mara said it because it was the honest word, the word that fit what she was actually feeling, which was something in the territory of *. Well, that happened, and I am still here, and I did not expect to be quite this surprised by that *. Thanos had not moved from his position on the corridor floor. He was looking at his screen. Then at Mara. Then at his screen. He was a species that had 17 words for fear and 0 words for what he was currently experiencing, and the inadequacy of his vocabulary felt, for the first time in his career, like a genuine failure. She walked back toward him, unhurried, the thermos still in her left hand, and stopped a few feet away. He looked up at her. She looked down at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment that was long enough to be significant without being long enough to be awkward. Then Mara sat down on the corridor floor next to him, not gracefully, just the way a person sits down when their legs have decided they have been standing long enough, and looked at the dust on her sleeve from where a particle of Carathol had drifted through the ventilation cycle and settled on the fabric. She picked it off with 2 fingers. Held it up. watched it drift away. Thanos watched her watching it, and thought, in the careful, data-oriented way of a species that had built its entire civilization on the correct calculation of threat, that he had just witnessed the most important thing that had happened in 400 years of Concord history, performed by a person who was currently sitting on a corridor floor with dust on her sleeve looking faintly tired. He was not wrong. 3 days passed before the Concord reconvened. 3 days of communications flying between 47 delegations that had scattered across 6 sectors. 3 days of sensor analysis and historical cross-referencing and the specific diplomatic silence that descends when something has happened that no one has the language for yet. And then, on the 4th morning, every ship returned to Varel 9 and every delegation filed back into the council chamber. The chamber felt different. Not physically, the same alloy walls, the same translation arrays, the same long table with its carefully arranged seating, but the way a room feels different after something happens in it that it was not designed to hold, a residual quality in the air, a slight shift in how sound moved through the space. Every delegation took their usual seats. Every delegation looked at the seat near the east door. Mara Voss sat down, uncapped her thermos, and did not seem to notice. Orithvel presented the findings first. 72 hours of continuous sensor analysis, the work of 14 research teams from 9 different species, and the conclusion was the same regardless of who ran the data or which instruments they used. Carathol was gone, not dormant, not dispersed into a recoverable pattern, not relocated, gone, with a completeness that the instruments confirmed and then confirmed again because the first confirmation seemed too complete to be real. The dust particles that had been collected from the station's ventilation systems and outer hull showed molecular signatures consistent with Carathuel's documented composition, meaning the particles were real, meaning the dissolution was real, meaning 9,000 years of documented history had produced an outcome in the last 40 minutes that none of those 9,000 years had prepared anyone in the room to categorize. The council wanted to know what weapon had been used. This question came in 17 different diplomatic registers, some direct, some wrapped in formal language, some phrased as technical inquiry, but it was always the same question underneath, because a weapon was something the Concord knew how to handle. A weapon could be documented, regulated, classified, kept, controlled. A weapon was a tool and tools were things civilizations understood. Mara told them, there was no weapon. The council did not accept this. She told them again. In the same words, with the same unhurried patience. Thanos had not slept. He had spent 72 hours doing the analysis and the cross-referencing and the historical record review that his position required of him, and he had been thorough because thoroughness was how he was built, but he had also spent 72 hours thinking about one specific question that none of the analysis addressed. He had 17 words for fear in his native language. He had been trying to think of what word covered what Mara Voss had done in that corridor. He had not found one. When the council asked its weapon question for the 4th time and Mara answered it for the 4th time with the same 2-sentence response, Thanos stood up. This was a breach of Varadi protocol. Delegates did not interrupt council proceedings without formal recognition, and he had been in the Concord for 30 years and had never once done it. He stood up anyway. He spoke for 11 minutes. Not emotionally. He was not a species that performed emotion in public settings, but clearly, and with the careful precision of someone who has thought very hard about a thing and wants the thinking to land correctly in other minds. He explained what he believed had happened, not the sensor readings, which everyone had already seen, the *Y* underneath the sensor readings. Carathal, he said, was not a weapon or a natural disaster or an apex predator in any sense those terms were meant. It was a system, a pattern that had built itself over 9,000 years on a specific input, and that input was the psychic and physical energy of civilizations running away from it. Every species that encountered it and fled had, by fleeing, confirmed the pattern, had fed the mechanism, had given Carathal exactly the dynamic it required to continue being what it was. 41 evacuation protocols, he said, 41 species, 9,000 years, every single response the same, and the system grew because the response was always the same, because there was never a variable, because not one species, in 90 centuries of contact events, had done anything other than what every survival instinct in the known galaxy said to do. He paused there, looked at the table for a moment, then looked at the human delegation. He said, humans evolved on a planet that was, by any reasonable assessment, extremely hostile to their survival, a planet with predators that outmatched them physically, with weather that could kill them, with diseases that moved faster than their medicine, with resource scarcity that set them against each other regularly and catastrophically. He said, and in that environment, The species that survived was not the one that ran most efficiently, it was the one that learned, at a level below conscious decision-making, that the correct response to a threat is not always maximum distance. Sometimes it is contact engagement the reach toward the thing that is frightening, because the reach creates information that distance never provides. He said, Carathol was 9,000 years old and had never encountered that response, not because other species lacked the physical capability, but because every other species had the good sense to be correctly afraid. Humanity, he said, had the good sense to be afraid and moved toward it anyway. The room was quiet in the specific way rooms are quiet when 47 species are thinking the same thing at the same time, and none of them have finished thinking it yet. Mara did not speak during any of this. She listened, drank her coffee, and had the expression of someone hearing a description of themselves that is accurate and slightly uncomfortable in the way accurate descriptions usually are. After Thanos has finished, the Savannian elder Orithvel, who had 17 words for fear and had spent his career cataloguing the evidence of what fear does to civilizations over long periods of time, sat very still for a long moment and then asked, with the genuine curiosity of a historian who has just discovered a gap in the record he did not know existed, "What does the human language call what you did?" Mara thought about it. Not for a long time, a few seconds, the length of a real thought rather than a performed one. "I don't know that we have a word for it," she said. "We have words for being brave, but those usually mean not being scared, and I was scared the whole time, so that doesn't fit exactly." Orithvel considered this. "What would you call it then?" "Stubborn, maybe," she said, "or just human." The Concord took 6 weeks to formally process what had happened. The documentation alone required a new category in the historical archive, as no existing category covered the voluntary dissolution of a 9,000-year extinction-class entity through non-weapon physical contact initiated by a junior diplomatic delegate from a species that had been attending the Concord for 52 years and still sat near the door. The seating reassignment was proposed by Thanos SS and passed by unanimous vote, which had never happened in 400 years of Concord voting history, and the resolution placing the human delegation at the center of the table was filed in the archive under the heading * adjustment of standing, Earth Concord Sector, following the Varel 9 event *. Mara read the filing on a tablet in her quarters and made no comment. She called her father that evening, the High Governor of Earth's Concord Sector, who had been awake for most of 3 days on the other end of a communications blackout and looked, on her screen, like a man who had aged several years in the span of a week. He asked if she was all right. She said yes. He asked, not politically, not governorially, what had actually happened out there. She looked at her hands, the ones that had been shaking for most of it, the ones that had stopped shaking only after, and was quiet for a moment that was not a dramatic pause, just the real pause of someone trying to find the honest words. "I don't think I was brave," she said. "I think I was just the only person there who couldn't figure out where else to be." Her father, who had spent his career calculating exactly where to be at exactly the right time, who had built a political career on the correct reading of situations and the correct response to them, was quiet for a long moment. "That's what it always is," he said. Mara looked at the window of her quarters, at the stars outside, which were in the correct positions, doing the correct things with the light, operating under all the expected rules, and thought that he was probably right. She thought that was probably the most human thing she had heard anyone say in weeks. And she thought that somewhere in the Variety archives, a historian was staying up very late trying to write a new word for a species that was afraid of everything and reached out. Anyway, she hoped he found one. She finished her coffee. Outside, the stars were steady and clear and entirely ordinary, which was, it turned out, the best possible thing they could be.